In the metaphor, I compare who you really are, the infinite being that you really are, to the sun. Whenever we think of the sun, we think instantly of huge amounts of power and light and heat. And so it's a great metaphor for the power and presence of who you really are. Now, from that infiniteness, as we discussed, we created the illusion of this physical universe as a playing field on which we could play the human game. And then, in order to make phase one of the human game work, we had to create a solid, dense cloud cover, which is the whole process of convincing ourselves that the illusion is real and that we are the opposite of who we really are within it. So we create this solid, dense cloud cover. And I want you to think solid and dense, like concrete or like steel or something. Very solid, very dense, very difficult to get through. And when we do that, everything in the illusion, everything on the other side of the cloud cover, metaphorically, becomes dark and cold compared to the sun, the infiniteness of who we really are. So what happens when you begin the phase 2 game and you start using the tools is that your expanded self takes you to this solid, dense cloud cover, metaphorically, and says, let's start chipping away here. Let's start digging here. And every time you use a tool, you dig a trench, so to speak, within the dense cloud cover a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. And at the beginning, you haven't broken through. No light or power or heat or energy of who you really are is shining through because the cloud cover is still in place. But you keep using the tools, you keep using the tools, and you deepen the trench, you deepen the trench, you deepen the trench, until finally you poke a hole through. And then some of the heat and the light and the power of who you really are, the sun of who you really are, shines through that hole. Then you continue to use the tools, and you widen that hole, and you widen that hole. And then your expanded self takes you to another part of the solid, dense cloud cover and says, let's start digging here. Let's start chipping away here. And the same thing repeats itself. You dig, 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 dig. It doesn't seem like anything's happening at the beginning, but then ultimately you pop a hole through and some more light of who you really are shines through. Then you widen the hole, you widen the hole, you widen the hole. Then you repeat this process over and over and over again. You dig a hole all the way through the solid, dense cloud cover. You widen it. Then you dig another hole all the way through the cloud cover. Then you widen that. And you keep doing this over and over and over again until you ultimately knock out huge chunks of the cloud cover. And as you start knocking out these huge chunks, more and more and more and more of the sun, the light, the heat, the power of who you really are shines through. And then you are able to express yourself, the power and presence of who you really are, more and more and more and more, which is when the transformations take place. Each time you poke a hole or widen a hole or knock out a chunk, you could say that the illusion, that the hologram gets brighter and brighter and brighter and warmer and warmer and warmer. And you have access to more and more of the power and the presence and the abundance of who you really are. And this is what the Phase 2 game is about. Knocking out, ultimately, huge chunks of that cloud cover so that the sun and the power and the light and the heat of who you really are can shine through and transform you and your human experience. All right, now I want to come back to the sun and clouds metaphor and these particular images that I just showed you in the video to make a very, very important point and to hammer something home that I sketched earlier. Over here, you've got metaphorically the sun of who you really are. Infinite being, infinite power, infinite wisdom, infinite abundance, true joy. In phase 1, the cloud cover is built here to block an experience of that. And over here is the phase 1 experience in what I call the storyline, the illusion. I also use a metaphor, as you'll possibly see, of the hologram. But the human game experience in phase 1, and as I mentioned, I make this black and white, and I talk about it as being dark and cold in order to simply contrast the difference of the infinite experience and the natural state. Now, I mentioned at various places prior to you getting to this video that so many spiritual paths, personal development paths, tools, techniques, and strategies ultimately become dead ends become collections of ideas and concepts and experiences, but nothing really changes. The reason is simple. It's because all of the techniques and the strategies and the paths are followed here in the dark, black and white, cold, metaphorically, phase one world. And nothing actually happens in the cloud cover, even though many of the systems and the methods and the teachings and such, even though they wouldn't use that language necessarily, the promise, the pointer would be that something does happen in here, but it doesn't. And so as a result, the cloud cover stays firmly locked in place, just as dense, just as many layers, blocking the experience of infiniteness and the continuing phase one patterns repeating here in our day-to-day lives. Somehow continuing the metaphor, and again, it's just a metaphor, you've got to get into the cloud cover and you've got to start doing work in the cloud cover. You've got to start metaphorically drilling those tunnels and poking the holes and allowing the sun to shine through. And ultimately, as you saw in the previous video, knocking out big chunks so that huge amounts of this sun, of who you really are, can shine in and transform in here. But so many of the things that we do, so many of the paths that we follow, again, even if the promises that they would, we thought they would, we wanted them to or whatever, we were just basically running around in here, doing things, appearing to do things in here, but not in here, and certainly not doing any deep or profound work to knock out the cloud cover. And so that's why so many things are dead ends. And it appears that our life has changed, but it hasn't, because even if we do run around in here and use these paths and techniques and tools and strategies, and we're able to change one thing or two things or three things, down comes on the assembly line some other thing that we're unhappy about, that isn't the way we want it, that we want more of, that we want less of, whatever. And so even if the techniques appear to change one or more details in here, the phase one dynamics continue. Other details surface that cause us to continue to be experiencing phase one dynamics because, again, nothing actually happened in here. Here's a quick summary, just to make sure that we're clear, of the three phases of the human game. Phase one is all about building the cloud cover, convincing yourself you're the opposite of who you really are, and that this illusory world, three-dimensional reality, as it's typically called, the physical universe, whatever you want to call it, is real. Phase two is about rediscovering the truth, with capital T's, undermining the structural integrity of the cloud cover, knocking out holes and chunks of that cloud cover, so that the sun of who you really are, the truth, the natural state, can shine through and transform your experience in permanent and profound ways. Phase three is about playing in the sunshine, metaphorically, with the cloud cover completely knocked out, and playing for the sheer pleasure of playing, with no limits or restrictions, except the ones that are built into games to make them fun to play. The journey into phase three, the journey into a direct knowing and experience of truth with a capital T, moves and feels and looks, metaphorically, something like this. In the next segment, we'll cover what to expect when you take this journey through the cloud cover back into a direct experience of the truth with a capital T and the sun of who you really are.